Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hello, and welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, our guest is Jennisue Jessen. She is a survivor of human trafficking, founder and CEO of Compass 31. She has dedicated over 25 years to combating human trafficking globally. Big deal. Her remarkable journey from being sold into the sex trade at the age of 4 to becoming a key figure in shaping federal counter-trafficking policies reflects her passion for justice and resilience. That bio is one of the shorter ones I've read in a while, but it really packs a punch. Yeah, it sounds like you've had a nightmare and you turned that nightmare into your purpose and passion. Is that a good summary?
That is a good summary. I feel like my experience has been that trauma does not define us, it equips us. And I have learned some things in the fiery furnace of my life that now empower and equip me to facilitate freedom for people, not only in the US, but globally.
Okay. So I have interviewed other women who've been trafficked. I have not interviewed anyone that was trafficked at 4. That seems pretty heavy, for lack of a better word.
It is heavy. Yes, ma'am.
What about your story are you comfortable with sharing with us today? And you don't have to get explicit, but what parts of it do you think will help connect to other women listening that might be being trafficked right now or have been in the past?
Yeah, I think one of the common threads for those that have experienced human trafficking like myself is the vast majority of those trafficked have a history of childhood sexual abuse or sexual assault. And so that is a common thread, whether it happens in the context of a family, which is obviously a frequent occurrence with sexual abuse, or within a community and trusted individuals. There is a significant overlap between being sexually abused as a child and being trafficked as a child or an adult. And if we had a Venn diagram, they don't necessarily intersect 100%, but there's a huge area that speaks to the trauma of that intimate violation. And in my case, it was familial trafficking, which is little discussed in the counter-trafficking movement. But over 76% or around 76% of individuals who are trafficked are initially trafficked by a family member or a trusted partner. And so there's a lot of commonality, whether your listeners have been trafficked or not, with the violation that comes with sexual assault and that core invasion or betrayal. And so my trafficking was at the hands of my grandfather, my step grandfather. He began selling me to other men for sex at the age of 4. He had been grooming me for some time before that. But the first time I was sold was at 4. And my world turned upside down and inside out. I had no way to reconcile what was happening. And that violence continued until at the age of 17, the day after a failed suicide attempt. God intervened to provide my rescue and escape. And so I think I would have a lot of commonalities for those that have a history of sexual abuse, whether or not that ventured into the commercial space of them being exploited for profit.
Obviously, I have a lot of compassion for that experience for you. I can imagine the symptoms of complex trauma were not very helpful during your early development. What where were your parents, or what roles did your parents have in all of this at the time?
Yeah, my parents were, when I tell my story, and we can go more or less in depth. I don't want to trigger or create problems for your listeners, but we can explore as much of that as you want. When I tell my story, I usually make very little or no reference to my parents because in my story they were functionally absent. By that, I mean my dad was an alcoholic and my mom was addicted to my dad. And so my household was often in a state of upheaval or crisis. There was just a lot of drama that goes along with that. And I believe now, with some time and healing, that they absolutely were trying to make the best possible choice. When our household was in crisis, they would send me 3 hours away to my grandparents' house. And they were doing it, I think, just to keep their own heads above water
Sure.
and not knowing what violence I was enduring. But my grandfather was not the safe haven that they thought they were sending me to. And that 3 hour buffer, I would go for days, weeks, sometimes months at a time to my grandparents' house. And that 3 hour buffer provided all the distance needed for my grandfather to be able to keep secret the violence that he was perpetrating against me.
Yeah. Yeah, and the reason I asked about your parents is not necessarily for blame, although they definitely have a role in some of the responsibility of this. It's more to show the audience that when girls or children in general are raised in environments where there is dysfunction, chaos, abuse of substances, that it just makes the children even more vulnerable. And I know it's like parents most of the time are just trying to do the best they can. They have their own issues and struggles. And so it sounds like in this story, they weren't directly responsible. It was just more that they had a lot of their own struggle going on.
That is such an important point, Karen. And one of the things that I'm so passionate about is trafficking, exploitation, but sexual abuse and sexual assault is happening all around us. And we are consumed by the busyness of our lives. We're so busy scurrying from one thing to the just trying to keep our own head above the water, that we are oblivious to the people that are hurting all around us. And when we can just slow down and take a deep breath and be fully present with our own stuff, our own trauma, our own history, it allows us to meet other people with compassion that are also hurting. There were a lot of reasons that my parents could have or should have known. And this might be important for your listeners who want to protect their growing children. People ask all the time, didn't you tell? Why didn't you tell? Did you try to escape? Didn't you tell your parents? Those are really common questions. And anybody who's endured sexual abuse, there's all kinds of secrecy and shame that perpetuate it, right? There's all kinds of psychological dynamics. And my grandfather, in his late 40s at the time I was 4, he was psychologically far more complex than I was. So why didn't I tell? Also, there were a lot of ways that I did tell, but nobody understood or was able to take action. For example, in kindergarten, 5 years old, for Thanksgiving, we did this activity with the turkey hands, and we had to color a picture of our family that was going to celebrate Thanksgiving together. And I drew everybody in my family normally, but my grandfather was 2 to 3 times bigger than anybody else on the page. And my grandfather was the only person that I drew colored naked and with an erection. And this is in a public school, kindergarten. And my kindergarten teacher took the picture, called my mom. My mom came in, picked me up, took the picture home. And my mom was furious. And she was just outraged. This is not something, you don't draw pictures like this. Tore up the picture. And did I use words? No. Did I say what my grandfather was doing? No. But in the only way my 5-year-old brain could communicate, there's something really wrong here. So there were several instances like that in my childhood that people could have, should have, would have known, but either didn't pick up the clue or didn't know how to effectively intervene. So that's one of the things that I'm most passionate about bringing forward is that when we're slow and quiet and attuned to our own trauma, our own pain, we also have the capacity to tune into others and intervene in ways that are helpful or strategic.
What's concerning about your example is I thought you would say something like, oh, I was wetting the bed a lot. And those of us in the field know that's a symptom of sex abuse.
Yep.
But it's subtle, so it would make sense that a parent may not pick up on that or not know that. But most 5-year-old little girls aren't drawing erections. So it doesn't feel very subtle to me.
And I also had the bedwetting. I went to a clinic and had kidney test and bladder test because I was wetting the bed at 6, 7, 8 years old. At 9 years old, there was an event that was really brutal and it put me in a catatonic state for several days. And during that time, my mom came to pick me up and recognized like I was literally clinically catatonic. So she was concerned and she took me next door to a pediatrician who was a really good guy, Dr. Dennis. I have nothing but affection for this man who set me on his kitchen table and looked me over and talked to my mom. And they had a conversation that, yeah, I don't know what's wrong, but if she doesn't snap out at it in 7 days, we'll put her in the hospital. And my mom took me home and her response was, I don't know what happened, but I'm not ever letting her go back to that house. And so she didn't ask. And in all fairness, had she asked, I wouldn't have had the words or capacity to tell her what was happening. But again, it was another like, oh, something clearly really bad has happened and not an investigation, not an intervention. And while she did make that point when I was 9 years old, we'll never let her go back there again. That same summer, my dad quit drinking, which was a great, beautiful thing. But my parents felt like they needed a do-over. And so they moved our family instead of 3 hours away from my grandparents to half a mile away from my grandparents. And so his access changed. He didn't have days and weeks to cover injuries like he had before, but his presence was eminent and he could have access to me day in, day out, all the time. So it's things like that. There are subtle signs and there are really clear signs. I had the first symptoms of a sexually transmitted infection in first grade. And my first grade teacher and school nurse discovered I was really uncomfortable and thought that was the problem. Again, called my mom. My mom again took me to the doctor, got a prescription for antibiotics, whatever the treatment was at the time. But again, no questions, no, how does a 6-year-old get a sexually transmitted infection? It's not from a toilet seat.
I don't understand why there wasn't an investigation then.
Right. Part of it is I'm old. I may not look like it on screen, but this was in the 70s and child protection policies were not the same. You don't talk about what's happening at home. Culturally was different. Certainly sex trafficking wasn't something that was discussed. My mom had her own history of trauma that made it really hard for her to see or engage or protect me from mine. So it was a different age in the 70s when I guess maybe I was in kindergarten, yeah, in 77.
Okay. Yeah, we're about the same age, but I feel like I look a ton older than you. You're aging beautifully.
Thank you.
Okay, so for maybe parents listening, what other signs of sex abuse do you think you exhibited that maybe the average person wouldn't know? The bedwetting is one I found a lot of people don't know.
Yeah, the bedwetting, the sleeplessness, they're in my own personal case, my own study, if you looked at it that way, like my grandparents, I said, lived 3 hours away. And as a child, when we would get in the car to go to my grandfather's house for the whole 3 hour trip, I would be violently car sick, throwing up multiple times in the car, just violently ill. But if anybody had eyes to see and was curious, the trip home, the same car, same road, I never got sick once. I only got car sick going to my grandparents' house. I never got car sick coming home from my grandparents' house. So there are these subtle, oh, wait, she doesn't get car sick anywhere else. She only gets car sick on this trip. That could be a clue if there were eyes to see. There were pictures I drew. There were in kindergarten, one of my coping strategies, I ended up cutting off my hair, like a big chunk of my hair, and hiding it in my desk. Coincidentally, just days before, a perpetrator had controlled me by my hair, holding my hair. And so I took that chunk and I cut it off and hid it in my desk. And my mom didn't notice. My kindergarten teacher noticed. And 2 or 3 days later, again, called my mom in, showed her this handful of hair in the back of my desk. And my mom took me to the hair salon and got a little pixie bob cut. And there was no question, no conversation. Certainly manifestations that would fall into the category of self-harm when we have children that are expressing themselves through self-harm behaviors, whether it's cutting or burning or banging their head. Sleep patterns can be predictive. One of the ways that the only way I could fall to sleep as a child was I would go to my room and I would tuck all the blankets in as tight as I could get them. And then I would wiggle in from the top. So I was completely pinned down. And now in therapeutic environments, we have weighted blankets, which are amazing,
Right.
that calm the system. But what I was trying to do was make sure I couldn't be taken or assaulted at night. Any one of those things isn't a tell in and of itself. A child might be a bedwetter for any number of reasons that have to do with anxiety or physiology or sleep patterns. It could be any number of things. But when you start having a collection of symptoms where a child is self-harming, they have very low self-worth, they're talking about themselves in derogatory ways. I'm stupid. I'm a whore. If you have a 5 or a 6-year-old like I was, who would say, I'm a whore, that should have been a really red flag to adults in my life.
How
But
did you know that? How did you know that word? Did one of the perpetrators call you?
that was something that my grandfather used regularly.
Wow.
So when you have a collection of symptoms and even provocative language, if that's just in and of itself one thing, in our day and age with social media, with what's online, with what's on YouTube and Netflix, kid could use provocative language because that's what they're hearing in their social media or entertainment. If it's a standalone symptom, then that's one thing. But if you have multiple symptoms collecting, then it's really important to explore with curiosity. Children will more often communicate through the right side of their brain, which is through emotion, through physical action, and through pictures, than they will in a logical, linear, linguistic way, the left brain. They don't have a frame of reference for how to document this happened at 5:57 and this happened at 6:03 and this happened at 6:10 and right, because even how it's stored in the brain gets all mixed up, and the only way they can communicate it is with their emotions, their actions, or with pictures. So when we have a collection of symptoms that is in all three of those categories, we need to be very alert to the fact that they may have experienced some sort of traumatic event. And it could be sexual abuse, it could be trafficking, it could be an act of violence at school or bullying. It could be a number of things, but when we have the collection of symptoms, that's when our alarm bells should be going off.
Absolutely. Okay, before we move on into your professional life, can you tell us a little more about how this abuse stopped? You said something about God intervening. Can you say a little more about
Yes,
that?
absolutely. And I can only share authentically from my experience because it's my experience. I have no intention to like force my beliefs on anybody else.
Sure.
But in my own journey, I credit God with saving me in and through it. For me, Jesus showed up again and again in the midst of violence and kept me together and kept me sane. And so by the time I reached 17, I had given up all hope that I would ever escape. I thought death was my only escape. And I planned and plotted to complete my suicide. But the day after a failed suicide attempt, I found out that I was pregnant. And with that, God awoke in me this mama bear instinct that I had never been successful. Had been a handful of times in my childhood that I was defiant and I tried to run or tried to fight. And I learned really quickly that my survival depended on my silence and my submission. But at 17 and pregnant, now I had this innocent baby to protect. And as desperately as I wanted to die, I didn't I believed in God, and I didn't want to enter into eternity with the guilt, the compound guilt of having killed an innocent baby as well. So I thought I have to stay alive at least long enough to give birth to this baby, and then I'll check out. But during the time of my pregnancy and after my child was born, again, I had this mama bear instinct that gave me the capacity to finally tell a counselor a little bit about what was happening. Drip disclosures. You test the waters. Can I trust you with this? Can I trust you with this? Tell her enough for her to intervene and get myself and my child to safety and essentially blow up the family in the best possible way when the truth came out, what had been happening. And so I often say, God used sin to send a son that saved my life. His perfect one, Jesus, who I believe perfect grace redeemed me in every way possible. But then my beautiful, perfectly imperfect blue eyed boy who tore his way into my world Christmas break, my freshman year in university. And that's how God intervened to bring me freedom.
No, that's a really powerful story. I really appreciate you sharing that. I think faith and it just provides so much hope.
Right. It really is. It's a foundational piece for me. And also, I recognize so many of the people that I serve have been brutally abused by people in the church. And so their interest in anything that has to do with Christianity obviously is a far distant thing. And I have such compassion for that. My grandfather was an elder in his church, was abused by men in the church. So I want to hold that with such tenderness. While faith is critically important to who I am and how I've come to be where I am, I also hold with great tenderness people who are not ready or interested yet in that.
I love that because if we Bible thump when we're sharing our trauma stories and our recovery, we are pushing away a huge group of people that see the church as being very hypocritical. So I'm on the same page with you exactly with that.
Yeah.
Okay. And was your grandfather or step-grandfather ever brought to justice when you?
He was not. I did end up pursuing legal options for justice. And in the day and age, by the time I did that, it was in the 90s. I had only reported the abuse that happened up until the age I was 9. And because I felt like the abuse that happened when I was 10 through my teenage years, I felt responsible for. I felt like it was my fault, that I was somehow to blame for that. So I only reported the abuse that happened until I was 9. And where I was in the Midwest in Missouri at the time, there was a statute of limitations of 7 years. And fortunately, we've come a long way in our legal system. But the other factor was there was a huge move in that season about false memory syndrome. And between the statute of limitations and false memory syndrome, the way that it was being propagated at the time, it was not a space that you believe survivors. You believe the person who has the power and the wealth. And so I did not win those cases. I lost in pretty devastating ways. My grandfather did go to his grave cursing God, and I do believe in eternal justice. But I did not see justice on this side.
Okay. And has that impacted your healing, or do you feel like you've been able to heal despite that because of the belief in eternal justice?
I have come to believe that God is a God of justice and that everything that I went through matters. It broke his heart. It devastated him as well. And it wasn't that it was just some absent watching, crying, like, dang, I hate it that this is happening in the world. In my experience, Jesus entered in and bore the suffering with me. He didn't just cry for me from a distance, oh, sucks to be her. He actually entered into these scenes and held me and wept with me as I was enduring the unthinkable. And the idea that suffering matters to him, that he cares about the poor, he cares about the vulnerable, he cares about the widow, he cares about the orphan. He's enraged by it. Brings me tremendous comfort. It means I do have an advocate, and that advocate is my friend. And I don't understand all the dynamics, all the implications of that, but it does bring me great comfort and peace.
I'm so happy to hear that. So now let's switch to how you've turned all this suffering into making a real difference in the world. Can you talk more about your company and the work that you're doing?
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Karen. As hard and dark as the once upon a time was in my life, I absolutely am living happily ever after now. And it's an amazing thing. The caveat is, it's not that I don't have nightmares. I do. It's not that I don't get triggered. I do. I sometimes still sleep with the lights on. I've been married almost 30 years, and I'm still sometimes a touch me not with my husband because I'm haunted. And still, I'm living happily ever after. And what that means for me is that all that I went through as a child now equips me. God allowed me to start an international counter-trafficking organization called Compass 31 in 2011. So we just had our 13th birthday. We're teenagers now. And it is the coolest thing. Compass 31 exists to fight human trafficking through prevention, restoration, and leadership development. And we were able to create a tool to teach people about the risks and realities of trafficking. That tool is called Priceless Cube. It's now operating in 43 countries. And our restoration work, we have restoration projects in Thailand, Bangladesh, the Middle East. We're partnering with a new outreach program in Athens, Greece. Our work has expanded into the Democratic Republic of Congo and Uganda and Rwanda. So it is astounding that I get to have a front row seat to watching Jesus continue to set captives free. That's what he does. That's his prerogative. And he did it in the beginning, and he's still doing it now. And none of that is in my own strength, but the knowledge, the wisdom I've gained in the fiery furnace equips me to enter into these spaces with great tenderness and compassion and insight so that I can walk alongside other people as they find freedom. And that's what living happily ever after means to me. that it wasn't wasted. The secrets of my childhood, they could, and some people cope this way, and it's an okay way to cope. I could have left them locked in a box, and I'm going to move on with my life and pretend that didn't happen and navigate life and triggers as best as I can without ever acknowledging what happened in the dark. Or instead, the alternate is to take each of those dark lessons and bring them into the light and sit with other individuals who have experienced tremendous suffering and go, I see you. And you can give voice to that. And you are safe. And look what you did. You survived it. The darkest, most unthinkable things, it didn't win. You're here. You are here. And that's what living happily ever after is. See hope sparked and awakened in people, that the possibility of I'm not defined by it, but I can use this to help facilitate other people's freedom and healing is wildly empowering. It, instead of surviving because of my silence and submission, now I get to use my voice in ways that impact other people. And
for people who can't use their voice right now,
who've not yet figured out how to use their voice, they can borrow mine for a season. And it's just such a privilege to have a front row seat to that. Again, not in my own strength, not because I'm so special, just because I'm willing.
It's really beautiful. You have a beautiful story. The recovery healing journey is a beautiful story. Yeah, I don't know what else to ask. I guess one of the things might be, I know you're helping survivors leave the dark situations they're in. Does your company do any education for lay people that don't understand human trafficking? Their workshops, seminars, classes?
Yes, I do that quite a bit. I speak virtually and in person at groups all the time. I teach law enforcement, I teach nurses, I teach frontline workers, foster parents. I teach those that have escaped from or are currently in exploitation. I do that in small groups, in large groups, in church settings, in school settings. And so if people are interested in learning more, I do little micro courses on how to protect your kids against online dangers. You can contact me through our Compass 31 website, and we can connect them with resources that would be helpful.
Okay, that's awesome. So tell us how to get to your website.
Yep. Our website is compass31.org, compass31.org. And we have a lot of exciting things coming about how we can each individually, just as normal concerned citizens, disrupt trafficking and create a more just world. So I would love for people to find me there. Or we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram. They can find me at Compass 31.
Yeah, and I encourage people to definitely check out the website, learn about these resources, because even if you just help one person, that's going to feel so rewarding to get women and men, young boys, out of this trafficking situation. Jennisue, thank you so much for being here and blessing my audience with your story today, your hard story, and your beautiful recovery.
I would say it's all God's grace, but thank you for allowing me another opportunity to reclaim my voice. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.